So can everybody see the PowerPoint slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So please don't hesitate to ask questions, because the study of OBLICON, it's really difficult. It's meant to be difficult because not only are you gonna memorize a lot of provisions, but you also have to memorize the requisites, the remedies of both parties, such as the creditor or the debtor. So, mukha mo ha. All right. Let's start. Let's move on to Article 1166. The obligation to give a determinate thing includes that of delivering all its accessions and accessories, even though they may not have been mentioned. So what does this provision mean? If you have an obligation to give a determinate thing or a specific thing, you also have to deliver kung sa itong mga accessions and accessories that are attached to it, even though they may not have been mentioned or even though walay kasabutan, because this follows the principle, the long adage that the accessory follows the principal. Now, the rule here is that all accessions and accessories are considered included in the obligation to deliver a determinate thing, although they may not have been mentioned. So for example, if you are going to deliver a specific thing, such as a, let's say a table. So ang table, you have to include its accessions and accessories, such as the stand of the table, the bolt of the table, mga pasabot na accessions and accessories, but I will further explain it later. Now, this rule is based on the principle of law that the accessory follows the principal, meaning kung sa matong kabit, mo follow yun sa principal or sa prinsipyo. In order that they will be excluded, there must be a stipulation to that effect. Meaning, for example, muhatag kong parcel of land sa imuha. But this parcel of land has 3 mango trees. Now, if you want, di ba, accessory follows the principal. So if I give you this parcel of land, automatic na ang trees po na naka-attach dito sa parcel of land, imuha po to. But, since ikaw may nag-plant atong mango trees na to, gusto niyo mo ibuton, i-replant si mohang new location, then you will have to stipulate in the contract that, okay, I will give you this parcel of land, but the accessories or its accessions, such as the mango trees, will not be included because I will uproot them and replant them somewhere else. So, ingana pasabot ani 1166. Now, under 1166, you have 2 terminologies here. You have your accessories and accessions. So, what's the difference aning duha? So, accessories, those joined to or included with the principal for the latter's better use, perfection, or enjoyment. So an example are your keys to a house, the dishes in a restaurant, the frame of a picture, or the bracelet of a watch. Whereas your accessions, these are fruits of a thing or additions to or improvements upon a thing. They may include alluvium. Alluvium is soil gradually deposited by the current of a river on a riverbank, and whatever is built, planted, or sown on a person's parcel of land. So an example of your accessions are house or trees on the land. So what's the difference, sir, accessories and accessions? You just have to remember na ang accessories pang beautify lang siya, whereas ang accessions, these does not have anything to do with beautification, but by nature or by gradual deposit nag-improve lang siya. So mga difference sa accessories and accessions. Other accessions, di ba, na alluvium? If you are living here in the province, makita ninyo ng alluvium along the river. Di ba? Makunta mo, hala, di gamay lagi ang river because there is gradual deposition of soil, meaning nagadungag og yuta ba sa side sa river. So mo na ginatawag nato no alluvium. Dahil mabuta na?
Wala, sir.
Okay.
Wala, sir.
So, klaro ha. So kung maghatag, for example, let's say you are going to enter into a contract of donation. So under the contract of donation, be careful lang if you want to give something, di ba? If you do not stipulate it, it will really include all the accessories and accessions. So para dili ma-include to accessories and accessions na let's say bawion nimo tong mga things na some things na naka-attach to the parcel of land, then you have to stipulate in your contract. Now, for example, I will give to you this 250 square meter parcel of land located at Baybay, San Antonio, Catiil. But I will not include the wooden house built there because I will move this wooden built house to another place. So, ano dapat? Okay, klaro?
Yes, sir.
Alright. So, muna yung yung effect of stipulation. So, you have to stipulate para, when you say stipulate, you have to put into writing. Wala lang pasabutan. Right, 1160. But 1167. If a person obliged to do something fails to do it, the same shall be executed at his cost. The same rule shall be observed if he does it in contravention of the tenor of the obligation. Furthermore, it may be decreed that what has been poorly done be undone. So, unsa ni siya na provision? No, now if you are engaged in an obligation which is to do, tapos mali or dili kaganahan sa iyang pagkabuhat, then the law will provide you remedies as to how to solve that problem. Now, what are the situations contemplated under 1167? So, under this provision, it's either the debtor fails to perform an obligation to do, meaning wa niya gibuhat ang dapat niya buhaton. Second, the debtor performs an obligation to do, but contrary to the terms thereof. So an example for this is, yes, gibuhat lagi niya obligasyon niya, but kaning iyang gibuhat, wala na appeal sa stipulation or sa atong gisabot previously. And lastly, you have the third example there. The debtor performs an obligation to do, but in a poor manner. Like for example, you were tasked to make a tricycle, but this tricycle is dilapidated or kanang kagang-kagang o kanang dili mulihok. As a matter of fact, I have a pending case on which I am the lawyer for a certain group wherein nagreklamo sila because this is a federation of tricycle drivers. Tapos gihatag sila ang certain amount of money. Tapos kaning certain amount of money was given by the DSWD. Karon naghanap sila og person para mo create og several tricycles for them. So nakapili sila isa, but what happened is wala gi-deliver ang pagkabuhat sa tricycle is poorly done, meaning dilapidated kayo ang tricycle, dili imudagan, halos gani dili imudagan ang tricycle. So that is an example of your performing an obligation but it was done in a poor manner. Actually, they initiated a case against that individual, ang ilang gi-file kay estafa because there was fraud on the part of the person who performed the obligation. So dagan siyang story. For example, sige pa-advance ding creator sa mga tricycle, tapos wala na niya gibuhat og tarong ba. So ana. Klaro ang situations contemplated under 1167?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So sa imong remedyo kung ikaw ang creditor, if the debtor fails to do so, option number 1, you will have to have him perform the obligation again. Or you can find another third person who will perform the obligation but at the expense of the debtor. So for example, atong tricycle, si A, ala siya, okay, I will give you 200,000 pesos. So he will give 200,000 pesos to B if you make 30 tricycles for me. Unfortunately, he failed to perform his obligations in letter B. So, ang remedyo ni letter A is to have B perform the obligation again at his expense or find another third person, si letter C. Kanya si letter C, muhimo og 30 ka buok na tricycle but at the expense of letter B or at the expense of the debtor. Klaro?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So another remedy is, lastly, obtain damages or danios. So damages alone cannot substitute for performance if owners can do it. If purely personal or special as a painting to be done by a reputed artist, only damages may be asked unless substitution is permitted. So simple sa butan. For example, nag-ingon ka sa BTS na, okay, BTS, I want you to perform the song Butter on my 25th birthday, which will happen on February 17. So unfortunately, they failed to perform their obligation. Wala sila kasaya, wala sila kakanta og Butter si muhang on the day of your birthday. So ang maas na nimo sila is damages because ang obligation man gud nimo is that BTS as a group should perform the song Butter. Nga dili man nato pwede na ang kaning mga putyo-putyo ng mga Filipino artists sila atong pansayawon o pangantahon og Butter, di ba? Because only BTS can perform Butter. So, ang imo mahangyo lang sa BTS for their failure to perform their obligation is to ask for damages or danios. Kay napakaulawan ko, nag-ingon ko sa akong mga classmates na maghatag na perform ang BTS sa akong birthday but you failed to appear. So, napakaulawan ko. Hence, mangayo kog danios. Now, for example, if it is an obligation to do, for example, kanang I want you to paint a picture of me naked. So, let's say it was poorly done. Pangit kay mong lubot, pangit kay mong boobs. No, dili man ni dako ang boobs diri kanang gamay mo kay mong gibuhat diri na boobs sa akong picture, di man nga akong picture. So, niana ka sa imuhang debtor. Hoy debtor, usaban ni. Wala ni sugot si debtor. Kung wala ni sugot si debtor, ayaw nyo pugsa because that is already involuntary servitude on his part. So what you need to do is to find another person to create your portrait na naked ka, but at the expense of your debtor. So that is the note there, specific performance is not a remedy in personal obligations because kung pugson mo ni mo ang debtor na buhato na, that is already involuntary servitude, which is a prohibition again, which is a prohibition stated in the 1987 Constitution. Klaro ta? Or na ipangutana? Klaro? Or
Claro, sir.
I need to exemplify? Okay. That is Article 11. Okay, so when a thing may be ordered undone. So if it is made poorly, and if the obligation is a negative one. So, ang question here is, if you are the creditor and gusto nimo ipausab ang imuhang i-order or ang obligasyon sa debtor, may mo lang nimo ning ipaandan nimo ang iyang obligation if it was made poorly and if the obligation is a -1. Now, moving on to Article 1168. When the obligation consists in not doing, and the obliger does what has been forbidden him, it shall also be undone at his expense. So meaning, tingol ka, okay, B, I order you not to do this. But, ang gibuhat ni B, who is your obliger or debtor, gihimo niya in taon. Let's say, tingol ka, okay, buhat ako balay, pero ayaw siya i-color o blue ha. Gusto na ko white lang. So, ang gibuhat ni B kay paint nag blue tanan imong balay. So, he has done something which you have forbidden him. So, what will you do as creditor? So, you will have to say to him that, okay, since you have clearly violated the terms of our contract, instead na white, himo ni mo blue ako ang balay, then you have to repaint it into white at your expense. So, mao na siya. Apart from that, you will have to also ask for damages or danios. Ikatawan nga sa imuhang silingan, hala, blue, anong blue man na imong balay? Anong color blue na imong balay? Pangit kita naawon mo na. Siga kaysa, layo pa lang niya. Ikan dito sa bundok, klaro kay mong balay na blue. Pangit kita naawon, bati kayo. So, yan na. Alright, naipagutan ha?
Wala, sir.
Wala. Okay, sige. How do you remove this? Okay. Yun. Article 1169. So, taas-taas na siya, no? Those obliged to deliver or to do something incur in delay from the time the obligee judicially or extrajudicially demands from them the fulfillment of their obligation. However, the demand by the creditor shall not be necessary in order that delay may exist in the following circumstances: when the obligation or the law expressly so declares, or when from the nature and circumstances of the obligation it appears that the designation of the time when the thing is to be delivered of the service is to be rendered as a controlling motive for the establishment of the contract, or when demand would be useless as when the obliger has rendered it beyond his power to perform. And in reciprocal obligations, neither party incurs in delay if the other does not comply or is not ready to comply in a proper manner with what is incumbent upon him. From the moment one of the parties fulfills his obligation, delay by the other begins. So 1169, I've already told you the difference between ordinary delay and legal delay, di ba? So in order for them to put them, in order for you to put them in legal delay, dapat kinahanglan mo mag-demand letter or judicially or extrajudicially demand from them para ma-delay na sila. Now, 1169 uses the words delay, but another word for your delay is default or mora. To put a debtor in default, as a rule, demand is needed. The demand may be judicial, as when a complaint for specific performance is filed, or extrajudicial without court proceedings. So demand may be initiated either by the filing of the complaint or when you send out a letter demanding the performance of an obligation. So kasi siya without court proceedings, pamana siya. In order for that debtor to be placed under legal delay or mora. So, when is demand not needed? So, when can you say na, hindi na ako kailangan mag-demand si Muha, si Muha debtor to put you in default? When the law so provides, when the obligation expressly so provides, when time is of the essence of the contract, when demand would be useless, when the obligor has expressly acknowledged that he really is in default. Okay. All right. When the law so, let's begin with when the law so provides. Usually, di ba, when we pay our taxes, it is done by filing your income tax return. Now, when you fail to pay your income tax return, automatic yun na siya na you have to pay for penalty or surcharges. So, the law does not require you as taxpayers na magpadala pa ang gobyerno og extrajudicial demands imuha. Let's say, ikaw, letter A, you fail to pay your taxes. Letter B, you fail to pay your taxes. Remember, there are a lot of Filipinos all over the Philippines. So kung magbuhat na sila na, it will be a waste of resources. So the law would provide na, okay, if you don't pay your taxes on time, then surcharges and penalties will be added on top of your tax. So muna an example of when the law so provides. Second, when the obligation expressly so provides. So for example, the promise to pay si 20,000 pesos on or before November 30 without the need of any demand. So pasabot ana, gibutang na ninyo sa kasulatan na in order for the debtor to be in delay, hindi na ako kinahanglan padala og demand letter kay nakabutang naman sa kontrata na ikaw mahimo kang in delay pag wala ka nagbayad on or before November 30. So hindi na ako kinahanglan magpadala og demand letter si Muha. Eh nakasulat naman sa kontrata na you will be in automatic delay if you fail to pay on or before November 30. What else? When time is of the essence of the contract. So may example, ani. For example, let's say, kisa ba yung mga babae na rin? Si Miss Cecil Linogonan. For example, si Miss Cecil is going to be married on February 18. So nagpahimo siya dress o wedding dress sa palang January. Tapos niabot na ang February 14, wag gihapon ang dress ni Miss Cecil. Kinahanglan ba niya mag-execute og demand letter? Of course not. Because of the principle, time is of the essence. The tailor knows that your wedding is going to be February 18. Karon, since kabalo naman siya na mao na imong wedding day, hindi na mo kinahanglan na magpadala og demand letter kay kabalo naman siya daan na mao na imong wedding day. Alangan naman na mag-excuse mo siya na, wala akong kabalo na wedding day nimo sa February 18 diay. So, ano ba? Alright, and lastly, when the obligor has expressly acknowledged that he really is in default, meaning giako niya na in delay siya or in default siya. Any questions so far?
Wala, sir.
All right. So you have here the different kinds of delay. So mora solvendi, mora accipiendi, and compensatio morae. When you say mora solvendi, this is default or delay on the part of the debtor. So na ay delay sa iyang sa imuhang debtor sa gusto nagutang sa imuha o gusto na obligasyon sa imuha. Sala niya ganong delay siya. Dapat ay ginaingon na mora accipiendi or default or delay on the part of the creditor. Meaning, ikaw na creditor o ikaw nagpautang, sala ni mo ganong delay ka. Lastly, you have compensation morae or default on both parties. So this is very common in reciprocal obligations. So say examples, for example, A lent B 20,000 pesos. Now, they decided that B should pay on or before February 28. But B failed to pay on or before February 28. So, A decided to execute a demand letter and send it letter B. Despite receipt of that demand letter, B failed to perform his obligation still. So, that is mora solvendi. Default yapon on the part of the debtor nimo. So, sa mga example, sa mora accipendi. For example, let's say, use the same example ha. Si B, di ba naka-receive og nagsabot sila si A ug B na bayaran ang utang on February 28. So, ang ibuhat ni B, nag-ready na siyang 20,000 pesos as full payment. Unya, i-deliver niya kang letter A. But, letter A, dili niya tanggapon ang bayad ni letter B because gusto niya increase ang interest ni letter B para madungagan pa, para makaginan siya si letter A. So, that is the fault on the part of the creditor. Dili niya i-accept ang bayad ba. So, siya ang at fault ganong unsa ganong delay. And lastly, compensation rate. Default on both part of the parties. So, what are reciprocal obligations? An example for that is your contract of sale. For example, I will buy your book in the amount of, let's say, 5,000 pesos. Now, if both parties will still not perform this obligation, then both parties are already in default, in delay. So you have here mora solvendi. You have requisites for mora solvendi and effects of mora solvendi. So di ba ang mora solvendi, ang naisala ang debtor, the obligation pertains to the debtors or obligors non-performance. The obligation is determinate, liquidated, due, and demandable. The obligation has not been performed on its maturity date. There is a demand made by the creditor on the debtor for the fulfillment of the obligation that is already due. So, sa may effect sa mora solvendi. If the debtor is in default, he may be liable for interest or damages. Also, the debtor will also have to bear the risk of loss. And even, very dangerous, he is liable even for a fortuitous event. So, if something happens to the thing which is promised, mas kinawala pa rin through an act of God, the debtor really has to perform his obligation to deliver that thing promised. May pangutana?
Wala, sir.
Okay. So, you have here next your mora accipendi and its requisite. So, remember, mora accipendi is default or delay on the part of the creditor. So, here you have your requisites. An offer of performance by the debtor who has the required capacity. The offer must be to comply with the obligation as it should be performed. But, the creditor refuses the performance without just cause. Dili niya tanggapon ang full obligation sa debtor without just cause. So sa may tabuan if na ay delay on the part of the creditor. So the responsibility of the debtor for the thing is already reduced. The debtor is exempted from the risks of loss of the thing. All expenses incurred by the debtor for the preservation of the thing after the mora shall be chargeable to the creditor. And the debtor may relieve himself from the obligation by consignation of the thing. So let's focus on the last two provisions. For example, ikaw na debtor, you have the obligation to deliver, let's say, a pickup truck. But your creditor does not accept it without just cause. So, nahitabo, ikaw nagbayad sa maintenance, ikaw nagbayad sa iyahang beautification, kaya di ba? As time passes, naga-rust man ang sakyanan, so ikaw nagbayad ana. So kaning expenses ni mo ani will be chargeable to the creditor. Meaning you will get reimbursement from your creditor. And lastly, you have here, the debtor may relieve himself from the obligation by consignation of the thing. When you say consignation, wala niya gidawat. Let's say, A has an obligation to pay me 1 million pesos with an interest of, let's say, 5% per month. So let's say, nagbayad na si A kang B with 1 million pesos plus all the interests. But B still refuses to accept the money or the payment. Gusto lang niya padako ng interest kaya padako ihang pagilan siya. So the remedy of the debtor will be to consign the money to the court. When you say consign, i-deposit ang kwarta sa court. You will have to file case for consignation in the court kay para mag-stop diha ang imuhang obligation as debtor. Dahil pangutana,
None, sir.
wala. So, this will help you, ha? This will really help you. So, please remember, kay hindi na mga lessons will be, you can use this when you become businessmen or businesswomen. Lastly, compensation money applies only in reciprocal obligations where the parties are both guilty of delay. The default of one compensates the default of the other. Now, let's move on to Article 1170. By the way, naamoy pangutana na gusto nyo i-apply sa business or anything. Done? Okay, let's continue with 1170. Those who, in the performance of their obligation, are guilty of fraud, negligence, or delay, and those who in any manner contribute the tenor thereof, are liable for damages. In short, if you have an obligation and you commit fraud, fraud din mo siya, naisahan din mo siya ba, what is fraud in tumawin niyo ba? Basta nagloko ka in some way. There is negligence or nilaghag on your part. There is delay in the performance of your obligation. Or there is a contravention in the tenor of your contract, meaning wala din mong i-fulfill ang provisions of your contract, then you will be liable for damages or danyos. So that your 1170 is further explained into 4 types. So these are the grounds para mahimo ka liable if you if there is fraud, negligence, default, violation in the performance of your obligation. So you have fraud, deceit or dolo. This is the intentional evasion of fulfillment. Second, negligence, fault, default if you are delay. And lastly, violation of the terms of the obligation. Now, those liable under 1170 should pay for damages or danyos, but generally only if aside from the breach of contract, prejudice or damage was caused. Meaning, tungod kay debtor, you failed to fulfill your obligation kay gi-evade, iwasan mo ang fulfill sa obligation tungkol sa imong pagkadilaghag or negligence. tungod kay in-delay ka, ug tungod kay ay violation sa inyong terms of obligation na ka-incur ang creditor og damages or prejudice, and he will be liable for damages. For example ha, si letter A, nagbaligya og Johnny Walker na ilimnon, di ba? Mahal ba kayo siya? So si letter B, siya, and letter A will sell this, let's say, for at 500 pesos. So good deal na. Here comes letter B. Uy, I want to buy your Johnny Walker na ilimnon, which is 500 pesos. May I order 20 of these? So nisugot si letter A. Pero para makaginansya si A, ay ang gibuhat kay instead na Johnny Walker ang sulod na ilimnon ato, palitan niya og kulafu, kanang balatuhon na ilimnon. So on the outside, it may appear Johnny Walker, but ang sulod niya ato kay kulafura. So there is deceit or dolo or intentional evasion to fulfill your obligation. Kunay fraud. So tungod ane, si B, nahibala niya na, sus, Johnny Walker lagi, pero ang lasa kay kulafu. So napakaulawan na po siya sa iyang mga amigo kay alangan, 500 pesos lang gud iyang baligyan. Unya gipang party niya ang iyang Johnny Walker, unya pagka-taste sa mga visitors niya or sa iyang guests kay kulafura niya ay ang lasa sa iyang Johnny Walker. So nag-initiate og damages si letter B against A for his intentional evasion of fulfillment of the obligation, which is to deliver 20 Johnny Walkers na ilimnon. So that is an example of your liability for damages. Okay, negligence. For example, si Mr. Dem Francis and Lorio. Isa kay og bus gikan Katiil. So isa kay siyang bus. So when you ride a bus manggod, you have there the contract of carriage or safe passage. In short, kay kontrata between you and the bus na ikaw ihatod sa Davao City safely. But the driver in this bus failed to perform his obligation by being negligent o nagdilanghag siya. Iyang gibuhat, nag-inom siya o alak while driving the bus. So nahitabo, nagka-disgrasya. Because of the failure of the performance of the bus to safely send you from Katiil to Davao City, then he will be held liable for damages. Meaning, si Mr. Dem makapangayo og danyos sa bus tungod sa pagkadilanghag sa ilahang bus driver. Klaro?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sige tag-ingon usa man ning damages, usa man ning danyos. So you have different types of damages. You have moral, exemplary, nominal, temperate, actual, and liquidated. So the keyword there is mental. So MENTAL. Wala. Kumagotan mo, what are the different kinds of damages? So ang imuhang acronym ana is mental. Okay, para ma-remember din mo na yun ng different kinds of damages. When you say moral damages, pag-ayaw ka sa court of moral damages or moral damages, kano man, kay tungod of his failure to perform his obligation, you incurred anxiety, sleepless nights, mental anguish, sige kag hilak ka na gabi tungod sa failure sa performance imong obligation. So i-award sa court sa imuha og moral damages. So, exemplary, for example, katong sa bus, tungod kay nagdilanghag ang inyong bus driver and para dili sundon sa ubang bus driver sa nagainom og alak while on duty, Then as exemplary damages or as a corrective, to set an example, I will award you, let's say, 50,000 pesos damages as exemplary damages. Isa pa. Nominal. This is to vindicate a right. When you say vindicate a right, murag, isa ba, retribution or revenge on your part kay tugod he failed to perform his obligation. Next is your temperate. So, for example, naka-incur ka og expenses and wala ka malo kung pila to ang imuhang expenses. So, tansya na lang ka kung unsa ang imuhang payo na damages. So, that is temperate damages. Actual damages, body siya to, for example, gamito na to example sa basa. Let's say, ang passenger na matay. Tapos tungod na matay ang passenger na naka-incur siya og expenses like for sa burial, kanang paghaya, ginago ni mo resibo. Let's say, ang mga resibo nag-incur og 100,000 pesos. Then you may ask from the court actual damages in the amount of 100,000 pesos. And lastly, if it is liquidated or predetermined beforehand, usually makita ni mo this agreement. For example, if A loaned 20,000 pesos from B, and if A fails to pay 20,000 pesos to B, then he will be liable for damages in the amount of, let's say, 5,000. Wala nyo kasabutan sa kontrata. So, wala siya. Sabot ana. Murag, gidetermine na ninyo beforehand kung unsa to mahimong damages if you fail to perform your obligation. Ay, pangutana?
Wala, sir.
Wala. Okay, so let's end there. Any questions so far?
Wala,
None so
sir.
far.
All right. So,